And in a moment, there was like this kind of epiphany of stop looking at what you've lost and look at what you've got left. This sentence just was going around in my head. What have I got left? What is there? Even if it's tiny, even if I can't dance and sing anymore and I'm stuck in this bed, what can I do in this bed from this space? And that was an absolute change for me in my mindset. And once my mindset changed, everything began to change.
Now, if you've got a teenager who's often outraged about the state of the world, and a lot of them are, I've got two of my own, you're going to love my chat with today's guest. Carrie Grant is a TV presenter, a vocal coach, an activist and World Vision ambassador who's worked with the charity for over 10 years. She was awarded an MBE in 2020 for services to music, to media and to charity. Carrie partners with World Vision on the podcast series Raising Changemakers, where she hears from children who are making big changes in their global communities by campaigning to stop harmful practices like child labour, child marriage and FGM. Carrie has a family legacy of supporting communities and making change happen. She has a special relationship with Sierra Leone, the country she visited with World Vision as part of the podcast. Her father's buried there, having visited Sierra Leone in 1992 to become a missionary, settling in the capital, Freetown. He opened 12 Bible colleges across the country, which was still running when he died in 1996. Together with her husband David, Carrie is passionate about campaigning for adoption, autism, ADHD, invisible disability, and inclusion, and have 4 children, all of whom are neurodivergent. So she talks about this too. Together, her and David host the Saturday Breakfast Show on BBC Radio London. I'm going to ask Carrie to say a little bit more about why she started the podcast and what she believes is key for us to hold in mind as parents of today's teenagers. Carrie, welcome to Teenage Kicks.
Thank you so much for having me, Helen.
I'm really excited because we've had an episode already about teenagers who are distressed about climate change, because it's one of the things that I've picked up in one of the many things that I've picked up in my own kids that they're outraged about in the world today and would like to change. So I'm excited to talk to you about, to kind of expand the topic and hear about all the things that you're involved in. But before we begin, as is tradition, Carrie, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your teenage years.
Oh gosh, my teenage years, when I look back, it's just, this is so typical because my kids are now decided to start printing stuff right next to my head. So if you're hearing that, they never leave you alone, do they? No. Not even for an hour's podcast. So my teenage years, I think, were years of great hope, actually. I'd had a very, very difficult childhood with all kinds of abuse that went on in my childhood. And so when I got to my teen years, those were the years that I said, I didn't say it at the time, but when I look back, I think I was probably saying this. I was drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is the end of the way my family is, and I will lead a healthier way of living. I will have different experiences. I will have good relationships. I will sustain a relationship, hopefully, which would never seem to be possible in my childhood with my mum and my dad and various boyfriends that came after my dad, and violence and abuse and all kinds of stuff. So I think I was very determined, and I saw the arts as a way to be free of my past. I thought, I'm going to run my world. I'm going to be successful. I'm going to get myself a little house of some sort, as you thought back then, because it was so different, because it was possible. Yes. And I had everything worked out. But what I hadn't planned for was ill health, because that's something that you can't control. Pretty much everything else you can say, right, I am going to just kick butt and get out there. And so I was very determined. But then at the age of 18, I started to get very ill. And by the age of 20, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And so suddenly having a lifelong condition that you knew would limit your life in many ways really changed everything for me. It was a huge game changer in a negative way. So I had to then process the idea of not being this super strong, super amazing human, which, so I kind of, like many people in their teens, I mean, I teach many people with singing in their teens, and, you know, so often it's about building their confidence. I don't think I really needed that in my teens. I was super confident. And then it was a shock to my myself when, you know, I realized I wasn't as strong as I thought I was. And that, so really my 20s were about processing the failures of my childhood and then all the dreams I'd had. And so teens in a way were dreamy years and ambitious years for all the wrong reasons probably, but they were, I was very determined.
Oh, right. I mean, it's not what we're here to talk about, but do you mind if I ask how you came to terms with that, such a significant change that I suppose, I imagine it looked like it was threatening to derail all your plans.
Absolutely it was. Yeah, you've said it in a sentence, absolutely. So I think I was in my early 20s and I had been in hospital for months and I'd had surgery and I'd had a whole section of my bowel removed. And I was very poorly and in pain constantly. And I just thought, my world is so tiny. How did it get this small? And in that space, I remember laying in bed one night, it would have been about 4 a.m, and I was in a ward of different illnesses were going on around me. And the woman in the bed next door to mine passed away. And I just thought, it doesn't get more, how can it get worse than this? This is so awful. I feel like I'm living on the edge of life itself.
Yeah.
And in a moment, there was like this kind of epiphany of stop looking at what you've lost and look at what you've got left. This sentence just was going around in my head. What have I got left? What is there? Even if it's tiny, even if I can't dance and sing anymore and I'm stuck in this bed, what can I do in this bed from this space? And that was an absolute change for me in my mindset. And once my mindset changed, everything began to change because I started to think, I can still songwrite here. I can start writing. I'll be a writer because I'm a creative. So there's new ways of doing things. And I think in that space as well, I think that I've always had that campaigning heart, but I think in that space, my campaigner self was really born. It was, I need to fight for people who feel like me.
Yes.
Because I was really marginalized as a child and abused and all kinds of stuff. Then I had this teenage years of I'm going to go out and conquer the world. Then I realized actually I'm not going to conquer the world because life is really difficult. And then I realized, well, maybe I'm not going to conquer the world, but maybe I can just take a bite-sized chunk and start somewhere. And that's really where I began. And then it just grew from there, really. And because I found my voice in the darkest place.
Right. Oh my goodness. I had goosebumps with you talking about that then. Isn't that just so the case? And it sounds like you were the ideal personality to, because some people would just crumble, and that's a really sad thing. And those are the people that need people like you to help them see the way. But you had that kind of energy to say, do you know what, this isn't going to beat me.
I think when you are a survivor, there is always that survival instinct, you know. And so years later, when my children came with all of their stuff, I had to go back to that bed at the age of 23 or whatever I was and say, okay, this isn't what you expected, but what can you make out of this? What can you do to lean into this and make something of what you have?
Yeah.
And that's I guess been a motto for life. It's not that life is really super successful. It's not. I just do feel though that, you know, diamonds are found in the darkness. You're down in that place where it's like, oh my gosh, how do I get out of this? This is a real challenge. And sometimes you have to sit there for a while, not knowing, you know, not being able to move. You have to sit with the discomfort, don't you?
Yes.
And learn to be comfortable with discomfort. But in that space, I also believe there's magic. if there's terrible things, there must be magic as well. It can't all be bad. There must be something to be had in this space that is of value and usable.
Yeah, well, that's the human spirit, isn't it? You have to sit there it's kind of like reaching rock bottom, I guess.
Yes.
You have to sit there to realize that you don't want to be there anymore, and for your brain to kick in with, okay, then what can I actually do here? And then we become more resourceful than we've ever been before.
Yes, and stuff shifts. I think that's just such a message of hope. Like, stuff does shift. And even when I'm, and I still have moments where I just go, oh my gosh, the next thing's just hit me. What do I do now? But I'm confident in this at the age of 58 now, that actually something always shows up. So that's the great thing about growing older, is that you have the experience of seeing those cycles working in your life.
Yeah. It's kind of... you need to keep a balance, don't you? Because I'm very similar age to you, and it's dawned on me in the last couple of years that nothing terrible it lasts forever. There's always going to be something better coming, always. But with that recognition, I also have to recognize that there will always be something bad after the good thing. It's never going to, that's just life, isn't it? We can't always be on top.
Yes, which is why actually for me, I feel, I don't want to knock anybody else, but I really feel I'm challenged by that thing. I just want my kids to be happy. I think, what's so nebulous? What does that even mean? How can
Great word.
What? I want my kids to be whole. Because if they're whole, they will understand how to navigate both joy, happiness, and absolute sadness and despair. Because life will certainly bring all of those things.
Yes. And it's knowing that you can actually, that's what age brings, is knowing that you've ridden that out before, and you can ride out whatever shit is coming your way next. And there will be amazing times along the way that you haven't even conceived of yet.
And I also think in some ways those really difficult times I know it's a bit corny really, but it does allow you the appreciation of the good stuff. I know I started just before lockdown, not knowing lockdown was coming. I remember just thinking, my children are so difficult right now. I took one of my little exercise books. I'm going to write down everything positive that they do. And I got 2 days in and I'd done like 3 pages of positive things they'd done. And I just thought, wow, they're doing amazing stuff all the time.
Yeah, my kids are amazing.
I just need to notice it,
Well, that's the theory of a gratitude journal, isn't it? We're going massively off topic here, but every time I remember to write in my journal and read back a few days, I'm like, oh yeah, really nice things are in my life.
Yes. And I think, and with our children, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's that they can be challenging, and sometimes it's that the whole system, every system that you're trying to access is so super challenging. It's way harder than your children, is the systems.
Yeah.
So just having those moments to say, my child just gave the other child their crisps.
Yes.
And it's just like, wow. I've seen generosity in you. I've seen kindness, and that child wasn't nice to you yesterday, so that's particularly noticeable. And then that child said, "Thank you." Wow.
Yes, you've done something. You've achieved.
Small wins all the way.
Absolutely. I'm beating myself up now because I don't think I've ever seen one of my kids give each other their crisps. That's on the agenda for this weekend. We'll make it happen.
Yeah. Well, mine is all about the small stuff. So it's,
absolutely. Oh, amazing. Thank you for that. I'm so glad I asked about your teenage years now. Getting on to the topic of the podcast, how did, I don't even know where to begin, because you've told me that this is where the drive came from, to help other people. But how did you get involved with World Vision?
So World Vision approached me, I don't even know when it was, it's certainly over 10 years ago, and just said, we want to do a series of events for women, and we want someone who can tell stories, because I'm a real storyteller, and also do some music. And so I traveled, I think first to India and then to Uganda, and just saw some of the projects that World Vision were involved with. And they had, at that time, 10 years ago, there were the tiniest seeds of, let's do stuff with the children that will empower the children. Right. I think back then it was more about how do we help the adults to find work, to start tiny little businesses, micro businesses, and then they're self-sustaining. That was really their thing. Yeah. But actually, over these 10 years, more and more, what I've seen, and this last trip to Sierra Leone at the end of 23 completely blew it out the park. It was incredible. Was that they are all about empowering the children to make changes. And this, for me, was so exciting because these children are incredible. And I suppose, again, at my age, I'm looking now at there's many generations behind me now, but just what are young people able to do? When I look at my generation, that has really let the younger generation down in many ways. And we're not to be trusted in many ways, and that's difficult. So they've got to find their own agency, their own autonomy, their own way of speaking up and finding their voice. And that's what I've seen with World Vision, is going to Sierra Leone, meeting with all these young people. My goodness, they're so articulate. They know exactly what they want. They know how to voice it. And that's the work that World Vision have done with them to help them to find that. Then I did the podcast, which was much broader and went all over the world with young people in terms of, recording. And wow, the stories that are out there and the stuff that these people are up to. You've got there'll be a young child who's in a refugee camp with thousands and thousands of people. And they're starting like a little news corps within the refugee camp. So they make their own programs. They make that somehow they've got a little bit of equipment and they're learning how to tell their news, how to tell their stories, and then getting that out there. And I think for me, living in the UK, that gives me a face to a refugee camp. Otherwise, I'm just thinking, a refugee camp, it doesn't mean anything. But when you hear the voices and the stories, and that could cover anything from climate change to female genital mutilation. It could be hunger, all the different subjects, but that children are learning the language to speak up in, and for us to be able to hear that and understand what challenges they face.
Yeah, I love that, because you're right. My first, when you talk about refugee camps, I'm taken back to 1985 or whenever it was, and Feed the World and all of that. And it was all very much, it was very Western. And it wasn't any of the people involved in those crises. No. And so, being able to hear from the people who are actually there. But what I really loved about what you said is how you said articulate, but I want to say resourced, but they've learned how to do things for themselves, and not only that, but tell the world about it.
Absolutely. And so much of that is about learning the language of campaigning, the campaigning language, or speaking up for yourself, advocating for yourself, has a particular language. I had to learn that when I was told that my children were autistic or had ADHD, and suddenly it's like the world of acronym. You're like, see the Senko, or you might need CAMS about ASD or ADHD. And you're just like, I don't know what anyone's talking about. And you feel so stupid. I felt so stupid. And I quickly kind of cottoned on to, okay, that's what that must mean. I'd go home and I'd look stuff up. And then you learn how to advocate. I learned that as a Crohn's patient, how to advocate for myself as a patient, how to say, I would like to lead in my health alongside my consultant. And I want to take a position in that, rather than just feeling like it's all done to me. I want to do something with people. And that, I think, is exactly as you said. So young people are saying, we don't want this done to us. It's not just about sending us money or sending us food or sending us something, but actually, how do we work together to make something that is really sustainable? And that to me, the World Vision are the best at doing that. It's the sustainability angle and the empowering of young people.
Advocating for yourself is such a skill, and it's something that I think everyone should be taught, actually, and all our kids need to learn this. I've got exactly the same kind, not exactly the same, but a parallel experience to yours, and that I've never had to navigate I've never had to advocate for neurodivergent kids, but my daughter has type 1 diabetes, which is very, very underestimated in the world, very dangerous health condition. And again, I had to learn a lot of acronyms. I know so much about what goes on in her blood and her hormone levels that she doesn't want me to know. It's very unfair. And I've had to advocate for her with school and with her medical team. And I know when you said, I want to take the lead in my own health, you have to do that with your own consultant. Even the experts need to be told about what's going on for you.
Absolutely, yes. It really is. And then we as parents have that moment where we realize there is a shift where my child is now, because we've advocated for our children.
Yes.
Because we've had to when they're little. They don't know what's going on in their blood or what they should be eating or when they should be, what time to eat and all those things like you'd have with diabetes and all the stuff I'm not aware of and you are. But at some point, your child is going to go, actually, I'd like to now take control. Or you say, you're going away to uni or you're going to do this,
exactly.
or I'm going away for a week. You're going to have to do this now. And there's that transitional phase that happens with you as a parent and your child, which I've had to go through with each of my children, how they transition through different areas of life. Now you're going to have to speak for yourself. Now you are going to have to advocate. And I think that's a really precious moment. And sometimes they're reluctant to do it. And sometimes I've got 4 kids, so I've got a combination. Some, a couple are just like, I'm doing it myself and totally independent.
Absolutely.
And a couple are just like, do everything for me.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
You can never determine the outcome, the same children, different children growing up in the same home. But, helping them to advocate for themselves. I mean, it's really important, especially with something like diabetes, because it's a long-term chronic condition. That's going to be there for life.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel lucky in some ways with my daughter because she is of the variety that says, you just back off, I'm on this, it's none of your business anymore.
Wow.
And that creates all sorts of worries in that transition phase of, oh God, is she getting it right? And she's definitely not doing it the way I would, but that's right. She has to do it her way.
Allowing them. And that's what's difficult, because if you're allowing them to do their own thing, which of course is right that they do their own thing, however, if they're not doing it, if it's with something where it's a danger to life, it's hard not to step in, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've always known that she knows how to keep herself alive. As long as she's awake, she'll keep herself alive. It's fine. But there was a period where I used to try and micromanage, and it really backfired on our relationship. And actually, we are going off topic and we'll come straight back to it. But this is the point that I try to make with all the parents that I coach. It is, you've actually got to tolerate the stress that you carry over them choosing to do everything a different way to how you would have done it for them. You have to, because otherwise you'll ruin your relationship with them. It's so difficult. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's, I think for those of us that are in the special needs community, it's even more profound that in a profound way that happens, because you do have to micromanage school and health and social care and getting your EHCP and all the things that you have to do when you're a parent of a SEND child. It's so detailed. I mean, in a way you're desperate to not have to do all that detail.
Yes.
But these are challenges, aren't they?
Yeah, well, and just bringing it back to World Vision, I can imagine that's kind of the role that the World Vision people have played, and you must have seen this with the kids in Sierra Leone and other countries, to help them figure out their own way of advocating for themselves. Yes,
and I would say, so I was in Uganda in maybe 2017, around that time. And I would say that when the children were talking about forming school councils and having meetings, and they were just beginning to be empowered, but I would say looking back, they sounded a little scripted. Whereas going to Sierra Leone last December, there's a big change. That there's the World Vision people, they're there, but they're very much in the background, and the children are very much in the foreground, and they are owning what they're saying, and their lived experience and their own narrative is threaded through everything that they are saying. So yes, you are right. And I've seen that even on an organizational level with World Vision. I definitely have seen that change. It's about trust, isn't it? Trusting that actually they are able to fend for themselves and speak up and advocate and find the right words.
Yeah. Well, it's taking a leap of faith. It's like the first time you let your child walk to school on their own. You have to take that deep breath and wave them by with a cheerful smile and shut the door and then bite your nails.
Yeah. And then follow them on the map on your phone.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do nowadays, isn't it? God knows how it was for our parents.
They just had to trust.
Yeah, well, yeah. But every parent has taken a leap of faith. And clearly the World Vision people have taught stuff, and then they have gained enough confidence to be able to say,
to step
here's
back.
how we've done it before. How would you like to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've really seen that.
Yeah, amazing. What's can you think? What's your favourite story from Sierra Leone, or anywhere else? To be fair, whichever you prefer to tell. What have you seen that's been really like a goosebump moment for you?
Yeah, I think one of the most profound moments was with a young man who was telling me about there being lots of tree felling where he lives. And he was saying that in the immediate, it helps the village and it helps his family because they get money for the timber. But what it doesn't do is help them in terms of their hunger. So it's linked to hunger and linked to climate change. So the more they do of tree felling, the more, it's not good in the long run. And so I said to him, I mean, we dared to ask this question. In fact, I think when we were recording, I think it was the lady who had the microphone actually asked this question, not me, because I don't think I would have dared to ask it. She said, what is it like to be hungry? That just feels like such a personal question to ask someone. And he said, well, it means that I go to bed sometimes and my whole body aches, but my tummy really, really aches from being hungry. And then I have to decide whether I eat one day or leave it that day and try to eat more than try and double my portion of whatever is something really tiny on the next day. And how much pain I can tolerate so that I can leave it till the next day. And if I eat more the next day, that means I might get a whole 24 hours when I'm not in pain.
Oh, God. So it's about pain management. I don't think anyone...
And making choices that are just, I don't know, just so big. Yeah. Yes.
I hadn't even considered that hunger equals full body pain.
Yeah. And there was another girl who talked to me about, she was, I think, 11 years old when she went to school. She was younger than that. She was 9 years old. She was at school and they started talking about FGM. And she learned that her family were about to send her away because they wanted her to get married. And so they needed to do the female genital mutilation before that. And so she went to school and there was a teacher that was speaking about it, saying how bad it was. So she went to her teacher and said, this is about to happen, I think. I've heard my family talking about it. And so they had to call the police in the middle of the night and get this child away from her family.
Wow.
And she then lived away from her family until she was an adult. She's now an adult. She's married. I think she has children. But she had to live without her family for the rest of her childhood. And you realise the cost of standing up, the cost of speaking up, the cost of saying, I'm drawing a line for my family this far and no further. It costs, doesn't it? And the bravery of these young people, it's just mind-blowing.
Yeah. What a terrible decision to have to make. She made the choice between her family and her own body.
Yes.
I felt like crying when you were saying that. I'm so angry. It's just so unimaginable.
And then she went back to her family. She went to university in America in the end, and she got her degree. And then she went back to her village. She dared to go back. and said, you know, I've got my degree, and her family was so proud of her. She's the first person in their village to ever have gone to university.
Right.
And now her father, along with her, is an anti-FGM campaigner.
Oh,
so you're like, there was good, but, you know, she still lived half her childhood outside of her family.
Yeah.
You know, and that you never get those years back. That's trauma, isn't it?
Exactly. You know? And how many that doesn't happen for.
Right.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Right. Oh God, I've just gone through the whole range of emotions there in the space of 3 minutes.
Big subjects that these young people face, though. You know, it's
young.
And we have big subjects here, like climate change. Of course, our young people are really concerned about these things, and climate change anxiety is a reality. There's no doubt about that. And I'm not. There shouldn't be like, well, this person's got more of a something to stress about than you, but some of those stories are so harsh and hard. And climate change is literally affecting them, meaning they have to move village or travel, or they've got they're okay for the immediate 2 years of food because they've got money, and after that they've got no more trees to chop down, so they will starve. You know, that's the reality of the existence that they're living. Yeah.
And so World Vision are doing all this amazing work, and your brilliant podcast is talking about it for other people to understand what's going on and open eyes for people like me.
Yeah.
What's the goal in getting this message to all of us, I suppose, but I'm really interested in if you can reach kids and teenagers, and I'm specifically talking about them because that's what my podcast is about, but I talk about them because in this context, because everything I see, it's not just my kids, it's their friends and the wider adolescent population who are it's quite it might be a bit naive of me, but their energy and their outrage, as I said right at the beginning, and their passion for wanting it to be different, not just for them, but for everyone. My daughter's a massive feminist, and intersectional feminism is a big deal for her. And how can we help these kids? Because as you say, we're the generation that on climate change has fucked up. I'm just going to say it. I'll put an explicit warning on the podcast. We've really made a mess of things for them, not deliberately, but without realizing. And now we realize, and we're still making a mess of it.
Yeah.
What can we do to support those kids, and what can those kids do to help those kids who are out there suffering all this?
Well, I think that the work that World Vision does has two aims. Well, there's lots more aims, and I'm certainly not the person to give you the full, this is what they're there for. But certainly the podcast series is to encourage all young people to find their voice 100%. And in the UK, we've got UK people as well that are on our podcast. But also, obviously, World Vision's work is through sponsoring children. So when you sponsor a child, more of this stuff can happen. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. And that is what these people are talking back to governments. They're going, sometimes a couple of the people I met, young people, had journeyed to other parts of Africa and were parts of conferences that were, on a global stage. And so I think that's really wonderful. I think for our UK kids, the challenge, and you will know this from having teens, is that our children have such polarized opposite offers. So on one side, they're offered an incredibly fake, shallow, instant dopamine rush life, where you've got to look a certain way and be a certain way and have these certain things. And on the other side, they are offered something that is really gritty and drills down and has depth and is about caring and is about belonging. I agree with you. I'm so excited about the potential in our young people. The challenge, I believe, is to encourage the former group to become the latter group. You know, how we can recognize, you know, you and I are here, we both look nice and glamorous, I've got my hair and makeup done, but that isn't me in everyday life. This is me for media, and understanding that actually every bit of power that you get, however tiny, is currency, and currency is usable. So every single bit, for me, the minute I became a little bit famous, I started talking about Crohn's disease and talking about bottoms, and no one was talking about bottoms back in the early 2000s. It was too, like, you can't talk about poo and stuff. And I was like, no, I'm going to talk about it. And so thereby we break through another barrier that was there. And I think for our young people, just to say, any agency you have is to use that agency. If you don't have agency, join with others, because we create groundswell. And when we create groundswell, we can affect change. Change only happens when people break the rules. So someone has to shout from the margins and go, hey, over there, you need to stop that. And we're coming for you. We are going to protest, and we are going to do everything we can to make change. And change happens when enough people shout. Eventually there comes a tipping point and things change. We didn't see women in boardrooms when I was a child. We certainly didn't see working class people like me go to university. You know, I'm doing my MA at the moment. I would never have had a chance to do that when I was a teenager, because no one was in my family. You just got a job. You know, I left school at 15 and started work. And so all of those things, bit by bit, change happens and progress happens. But I think one of the biggest challenges for our young people are those two things, is to sit, which group do you belong in, but also a sense of belonging. You know, I think that belonging is so important on a deep level, not just on a shallow level. How do we belong to one another? That would be my big question for young people, is to encourage that, because the opposite of belonging is fitting in. I thought the opposite of belonging was not belonging, but it's not. The opposite of belonging is fitting in. I don't want my kids can't fit in because they're just so different. So there's got to be a place where belonging is about whoever you are, however you are, whatever you are, just come as you are, show up as yourself, and we are going to love on you. We're going to embrace you. We're going to make sure that we belong to one another in this really diverse and inclusive world. And there's no good stepping against that. There's no point in saying, well, we don't want to be inclusive. We don't want, look, you knock me down, there's 10 behind me coming for you. So it's going to happen. We are going to be more diverse and inclusive, no matter how much the grown-ups try and polarize us. The young people want that, and that's what they will get. I hope they get to see it in their lifetime, but that's what I'm encouraging my kids, is just belonging, create communities, make villages, invite everybody to join in.
Yeah. Oh my God. If I was looking a bit distracted, then it's because I was writing down timestamps because you've just given me so many sound bites for social media. It is all about belonging, and you're right. The opposite of belonging is fitting in. It's making yourself into something you're not. In order to feel as if you belong. And
if that doesn't cause anxiety, I don't know what does. Our kids really are like, I don't fit. How do I fit? It's like, actually, you fit right where you are. You just be yourself and show up. And you will attract people that are like you to yourself. And you might attract some people who aren't like you too, which is great.
Yeah, and that's when you make the change happen. Although the other thing I wrote down was change happens when you break the rules, which is something that no parent wants to hear.
No.
But it's so completely true. And now that I'm sort of out the other side of needing to keep my kids safe, and they are on the verge of being fully fledged adults, I can see, I'm proud of their rule breaking.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, in all the meetings that I go into with health, social care and education, I get into a meeting, I'm like, right, before we even start, who's prepared to break rules? Because the system is never going to allow you to do anything. So you're looking for those people that say, we don't normally do that, but that's my favorite sentence of coming out of anyone's mouth. I don't normally do this, but we don't normally do this, but Do something new then, because if it's not working, take it out the box and have a play.
Oh, you're speaking my language. Think outside the box. And if my kids ever listen to this, they'll be going, Mother, who are you? Because I've been such a rule-driven person, but I've seen the light.
But I think we all are. We're socialised to be that, aren't we? You know, and I was just the same. I did want my kids sitting in the restaurant and reading the menu in French and being really fancy. I wanted to be that parent that every other parent looked at and went, oh my gosh, aren't her kids great? But I didn't get that one. I got the one with the kids under the table and the one, walking out. Yes, I'm that parent. So, you just have to deal with what you've got. And actually, I would say that my children have changed me beyond recognition. And I'm so grateful for that because I needed that change.
Yeah, absolutely. My kids have taught me more about myself than I ever learned before they were on the scene. And more in teenage years than ever before that.
Yeah, that's so true, Helen. And I think the generations before us just said, you have to stick with this. We all know how to do it. There's a boxed way of doing it and that works. And I'd love to think, I would love it. My gosh, wouldn't it be simple if it did work like that? But these days,
boring.
We can talk, sociologically, psychologically, why that no longer works. It doesn't. It's not going to work in this generation. So we have to, for me, I had to jump ship. I got to go, I can't do it in that boxed way. Yeah. My children are different children. So, but, like you, I'm very proud of mine.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that because you've written a book about them.
Yeah, it's got a very modern family. My children, I've got 4 children, 3 birth, 1 adopted, and they range from 14 up to 29. And they are just extraordinary. They are really amazing kids, but they're all neurodivergent. I've got 3 that are trans or trans non-binary. Some have had mental health issues. They're all mixed race, obviously. So, we are a Jamaican house. And so the children are themselves and they are very different and they face challenges because they're different. And most children that have difference in terms of neurodivergence, most children will, if they're in mainstream school, actually any school, will probably, the chances are they will come out from school traumatized. So your child, you're dealing with trauma from a very, very young age. So we had to become trauma-informed parents. Probably about 10 years ago, we started on that journey. And it changed us and it changed our family. We also started to practice the thing called nonviolent resistance. And that really worked for our family. It works particularly if you have adopted children, NVR they call it. Absolutely life-changing. So those kind of strategies and ways of working with children and that deep, deep listening have transformed the way we parent, and our children have, they've been through a lot. We've been through an awful lot.
You're right. It is trauma because why wouldn't it be if you're having to fit yourself to that box that you describe when it doesn't work for you and be someone that you're not for 7 hours a day of being at 6 hours, whatever it is, of being in school.
And so if a child becomes, trigger warning, if a child has suicidal ideation, we had one child that was on and off suicide watch for 3 years in and out of hospital. And, as a parent, you're changed by that. I'm not going to be the same as I was before those experiences. And I'm different. I'm changed. And because your priority then is about keeping a child alive, you drop the SATs, you drop the GCSEs, you drop the everything. You're just like, please just keep breathing. And when you come out of that phase, as we did, you are then, you're building in a different way, but you're very joyful for everything that they do that works. And I look at that 22-year-old child now and I'm just like wowed by them. They're extraordinary. But those years were really hard, and there isn't a book. Well, we've written a book, but that you're learning on the hoof. You're learning as you're going, and trying to shapeshift into being the parent you need to be on any given day. And that's just one child. Plus you're trying to work,
and do everything else that you're supposed
earn enough money to pay your rent.
And look after yourself, because that's hard
Self-care.
as a parent. It's really hard because everything goes to the kids, and you eventually realise that you've got to pull some of it back for you, otherwise.
Yeah, and I think from those of us who are really empathetic people, which I am, I think I literally, not literally, but I've kind of climbed into the skin of my child in order to understand them. And it's really important to remember to climb back out again and, look at yourself in the mirror. Two things. I'm Carrie. Okay, I'm Carrie. Yes. I'm not this child.
Yes.
And secondly, I'm a good parent. On that, I will not compromise.
Yeah.
I know who I am, and I know I'm a good parent. And because if you start doubting that, it's over. You're gonna hit that slump, and you are not going to be able to get out of it for a long while. So you have to you're a great parent. If you are engaged and you're trying, you're doing your best.
Yeah.
You're not always going to get it right, but you're doing everything you can to make sure your child is moving towards wholeness.
Oh gosh, Carrie, I can I just book 7 more episodes of this podcast with you? I feel like there's so many stories that we could talk about that people would want to hear. It's been so valuable. I'll put the link to your book in the show notes, and also to the podcast for World Vision. And is there anything else that you want to say about this whole business of developing advocacy in our children, our teenagers, and the kids who you work with before we end?
I think it's that whether you are a young person or an adult listening to this, that you have a voice. You may not feel like you have a voice, but you do have a voice. And there are like-minded people out there who are also going, how do I find my voice? And when you find ways, that's the great thing about social media, find one another, create something, start chipping away, because there is a tipping point and things do change.
Perfect way to end. I couldn't have said it better. Carrie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
today.
Helen. Sorry I was so late joining.
It's all good. And people printing right next to your headphones. I have the same. I even had a builder drilling in the wall next to me when just as I started a podcast recording during lockdown. It's just normal life. That's it's real. It's fine. Yeah.
Dogs barking, children screaming.
Thank you,
Carrie. So much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Thank you too to everyone who's already rated and reviewed the podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Amazon, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review. It really helps get the word out, as well as making me very happy to read what you have to say. If this episode strikes a chord for you, please share it with anyone else you know who might be in the same boat, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. If you have a story or a suggestion for something you'd like to see covered on the podcast, you can email me at teenagekickspodcast@gmail.com or message me on Instagram. I am Helen Mills. I love hearing from all my listeners. It really makes a difference to me on this journey. See you next week when I'll be chatting to another brilliant guest about the highs and lows of parenting teens. Bye for now.